Ready? One, two, three. Cool.
I think that's my favorite part.
The slating?
The clap.
Hello.
So excited
Welcome
for episode 2.
of this. Oh, can we say it at the same time?
I think we
Can
should.
do
That
it?
would be really
Okay.
cute. Okay, this
isn't therapy.
I like how I went up on the therapy
And I
and
went
you went down. How are you, Simon?
I'm well. How do you feel about after the first episode? How are you? I have a habit of doing that, of like just accepting the thing and being like, okay, this is not I don't have to ask you how you are. You just have to ask me. I sound like a narcissist. How are you?
It's okay. You're an actor.
Yeah.
No, I feel really good about the first episode. I think that we of course didn't like touch everything or like we didn't go into like every nook and cranny about vulnerability, but I think we did it justice.
Where are you at with because you opened up that episode by talking about how you were vulnerable. You were feeling vulnerable being here, talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you feel now?
It still felt and still feels vulnerable.
Okay.
Because I think it's new, and I think that that's part of new things, right? There is an element of vulnerability, and it's like a really normal part of starting fresh or starting new things, right? And that's why transitions are hard for a lot of people, right? Is starting that like new things is it can be uncomfy, right? And for me, the way that I kind of embrace that is recognizing that like, you know, it's uncomfortable because it's new. It doesn't mean that we failed. It doesn't mean that it sucked. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue like to try.
Well, I read the comment section and we did get it wrong.
They would like us to stop.
They would like us to stop. So this is our last episode.
So
This Isn't Therapy. Just kidding.
So sad. Oh my gosh.
sad.
For people who are just tuning in, can you tell them a little bit about who you are?
Yes, my name is Simon. I am a filmmaker, and the person sitting across from me is who?
This is MSW Jake, who's live on the scene, and I'm a therapist. And so in the intro, you probably heard a lot about the ways that the work that Simon and I do is similar, and then of course different. But the common denominator here is that Simon does a lot of work telling stories, and I do a lot of work listening to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think after the first episode, where we put out this prompt about vulnerability, and asking people to submit your stories about vulnerability.
The prompt was, tell me about a time where it was hard for you to be vulnerable, but you were really glad that you were vulnerable.
Yeah.
Okay. It sounded better.
It was something like that.
It was something like that. In that ballpark.
And so the episode took the shape of exploring the different submissions that we received. And we realized after we got those submissions that there were a lot of stories about vulnerability in the sense of opening up, in the sense of sharing something new. And then there were a lot of stories about this theme of avoiding being vulnerable and this idea of avoiding feelings.
Yes.
And so you'll notice that the first episode really is about leaning into feelings, and the second one is more about stories about leaning away from feeling or avoiding feelings.
Yeah. It almost feels in these stories coming up how both of these people realized how the consequence of avoiding the vulnerability, how it played into what eventually led to them having no choice but to be vulnerable to get a release from whatever like shitty thing that they were going through. So it was kind of exciting too, because as we mentioned in the first episode, we had a second episode planned that was completely different than this, but then we received all of these wonderful submissions. So thank you again for submitting. And we were like, oh, hold on a second.
There's a lot of depth.
Yeah.
And
in the act of like interpreting what vulnerability is for these people and how they interpreted our prompt was so telling of like vulnerability. And in fact, we're like, hello, there is so much more to explore. Hence why we're doing a whole other episode that's still under the umbrella of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
But we're talking about, like you said, the avoiding of it.
For me, like vulnerability is like a piece of the puzzle. It's a piece of this like triangle, right? And maybe some other points of that triangle are things like connection and feelings and, you know, diving in and all that kind of thing, right? And so the vulnerable elements of that is just one aspect, right? And so
Right.
in a lot of ways, maybe the first prompt was a bit broad,
Yeah.
and but in maybe some people interpret it as being really specific. Tell me about like your first like impression or your first thoughts that come to mind when you hear like avoiding feelings.
I'm in a scenario where someone says something to me and it hurts me, for example. And instead of saying, you know what, that actually hurt me, I brush it off by saying, like, oh, yeah, no, like, I'm fine. Or
It's okay.
it's okay.
Yeah.
Or I laugh along with it when I know it actually it hurt me. So to me, that's, I don't know, is that right? Is that the right answer?
I mean, I love that. It's so cute. I love that you're like, is that it?
Is that
am
right?
I getting it?
I know. I don't want to
And-
fall into this trap of me like turning to you and be like, you're the expert. Tell me.
Oh, jeez.
This isn't therapy, but it's therapy for me.
Yeah, this isn't therapy.
But it's for me and me only.
This isn't therapy, but this is the personal session that Simon isn't paying for. So
Yeah.
he's only going to get a really sugar-coated version of.
Listen, listeners, if you want to have a session with MSWJ, you have to disguise it as a podcast, and then you will get free sessions. Promo code.
Girl, my practice is full. I don't need another promo.
Okay,
But thanks though.
no worries. Should we go right into our first story?
I think we should, yeah.
Okay.
And I guess like just before we do that, I think that I want to make clear that, you know, while we are talking about people's stories, people are consenting and agreeing to having their stories read and dissected. And of course, our intention or our role here is not to poke fun and not to make fun of people's stories, but rather just sort of use it as like a kind of a point of conversation and like a work of art.
Yes.
So without further ado, shall we get to it?
Let's do it. So, story one, I am calling You Don't Always Have to Be the Strong One. The first year and a half of my relationship, there was a dynamic of me responding to vulnerability or romantic confessions with a smile, and perhaps playing off of the seriousness of it. I felt scared and disconnected from my partner's feelings and his openness to express his feelings. I would express them in my behavior, but never outright. I always thought that if I vocally expressed my mutual feelings, that this would then throw off the dynamic of me being the safe one and him being the more vulnerable one in the relationship. I felt more empowered this way. That's so interesting.
That is.
There was one night when we started talking about how he felt I was less engaged sometimes, and maybe that he felt insecure in how I felt towards him. I broke down because all of a sudden realized that the safety and love I received from him was something he deserved to be feeling the whole time too. Oh, goosebumps.
Yeah.
And that I didn't have to do the work of continuously trying to remain safe. It was hard, but I made myself say out loud, I'm afraid if I tell you how much I love you and I let go, you'll leave.
Gasp.
This still remains an important shift in our relationship and one that changed things for the better. I learned that even though I feel scared sometimes of how much I really do care, sharing these feelings creates space for us to feel them together instead of creating a disconnect. My boyfriend is pretty great. I'm staring at his cute head right now.
Aw.
Yeah,
That's cute. My boyfriend has a cute head too.
mine too. For initial thoughts, go.
Yeah. Thank you so much for submitting this. First of all, I think this is a really great story of the power of connection, right? And the power of like how maybe our first impulse is to like avoid and like lean away and like not want to do it, but then of course seeing like a very positive outcome that comes from like the connection and togetherness of it, right?
Yeah.
I think it's like so relatable that it's really, really hard to tell people how we feel. Not even just to say the words, but to like actually analyze, like, okay, like, well, what is this? Like, what's going on here?
You mean like even name it?
Name it, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, to name it, to label it, to put like voice to like what our experiences might be like internally. Like I know for a lot of people that's really difficult work is maybe and I think a very common experience might be the idea of like bumping the mic there. Sorry.
And being embarrassed.
Being embarrassed. Oh my gosh. I think a really common experience is that idea of like it may be feeling a little bit like uncomfy inside and feeling a bit like prickly a little bit and like not knowing like what it is or like what's going on. And it's a very common experience because that's the way that feelings kind of operate. Like there's no language to them. There's no like rationality to them. For us to get vulnerable and for us to kind of like open up about that, like first we have to know what's going on to be able to do that, right? It's so much easier to like avoid it and to like kind of stuff it down or like to push it down because it's uncomfortable, right? Yeah. And I think that we all can relate to that experience of like, I don't want to feel the uncomfortable things.
But like, are we creating a monster?
Well, I think there's a deep fear that turning towards it or turning towards the feelings will make them bigger.
Right. The second half of that then is of this person's story as well, is not only will this thing be bigger, but it sounds like it's going to turn off the very person who I'm afraid of expressing this big thing to.
Yeah. And there's an element of like self-preservation there, right? Okay. Like really trying to, I like how you're like, oh, okay.
But that's it. Go on. Like your name, but like that's the verbiage that you provide that I do not have.
Yeah,
which is it's self-preservation. That's an act of self-preservation.
Yeah, and I guess like when you hear that, like, what do you think that means?
Self-preservation, very much what this person's doing, which is like, oh, I will be the strong one. I will be the safe one. I have to be.
Yeah, but what we're seeing is that like when we get vulnerable or when we get uncomfortable or when we sort of face feelings, there are actually good parts of that. Like there's a healthy and a good thing that comes from that.
Yeah, growth,
connection,
a stronger connection with the party involved. I can think of so many times
with the party involved,
with the party, like the political party. I think
with the Carly Rae Jepsen party for one.
Anyway, speaking of Carly Rae, if you're listening,
Carly Rae,
if you're, thank you. That's all I have to say. I don't need you to do anything else.
No,
just thank you so much.
Deep gratitude to Carly Rae.
Yes. I don't know what my
Where were we?
I don't know.
Carly Rae
Jepsen.
You've completely thrown us off.
I think the lesson of this one, actually, I don't want to quantify it by saying like this is the lesson, but one of the things that I'm taking away into the act of being vulnerable, which is leaning into your feelings, can provide space for growth and stronger connection, which might feel like the opposite of what you think. Because you think, oh, if I could share this very scary part of myself with this partner, which for this person, it sounds like, oh, I'm afraid to be down there with you because I feel as though our dynamic is that I have to be up here and you're allowed to allow you to be down here.
Yeah.
Because relationships are just power dynamics, right? We can have a whole episode about that.
I was just going to say that.
But when you remember when you're both human beings.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It does not feel like a beautiful thing to be like, oh, here is this completely like broken, ugly, messy person.
Yes.
And they shared this thing with me, and I just feel so connected to this person and love them that much more.
Right. And I think you said that so well because like, especially about the power, like holy hell, like holy, like power, right? Like that could be the reason why people don't open up, right? Is because maybe the power differential is so great, or just talking about like the act of like telling people like what you need, like is its own like way that power plays out in like a relationship dynamic. And that can get like really complicated to communicate your needs because we all have very different, let's say like love languages or ways that we like would have that conversation, right? Or like would receive that information. So for like your partner, for example, to tell you like, hey, actually the way that you did this, like that really kind of set me off in this particular kind of way. Wow, vulnerability city, right? I don't know. I just like have many thoughts, but like
I guess we need another episode because that's what I think we're taking away from this, so that we have to have a whole relationship episode.
Yeah. I think that relationships are absolutely fundamental to like us as human beings. Like we're a social species. Like we need other people. Like the only way that we can lean into like discomfort or like practice vulnerability is by practicing the ways that it shows up in our relationships.
And you don't mean just romantic relationships?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean like, I view relationships as like, it's like me and something else. So it could be like a hobby, a pet, like a social movement. It could be like a person. It could be, like an idea, an art form. Relationships are about like that, like dual nature and that like the interactive, like relational element of.
It could be with my couch.
Yeah, I'm in a very
I'm in
toxic relationship with my couch.
Mainly because it's toxic, because it's just full of stains. Yeah. I need a new couch. Listen, if anyone's listening that has a new couch that can give me one. That was really good. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Should we do the next one?
I think we should probably jump into the next one.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the second story that was submitted is one that I'm calling Keeping the Feelings at Bay.
I thought you were going to say like keeping up with the... Like, I thought that's what I thought you were going for, but that's fine. This one's great. Your title's fine.
The alternate title was Keeping the Feelings at Michael Bay Productions.
Explosion.
A secret. Okay, so here we are, Keeping the Feelings at Bay. It took a long time before I was able to positively embrace my tears, as I was shamed for them as a child. Wow. I have learned that allowing the full experience of emotions is the healthiest way of overcoming the unhealthy inclination of stuffing them away. Repressed emotions fuel my depression and come out in other inappropriate ways, which lead to emotional instability. Becoming numb or shutting down is just another aspect of instability for me. A rainbow of two colors just isn't. Love that.
Whoa.
Powerful. This person saying that each emotion has its purpose in the full range of human existence, and crying tears of joy or sorrow is a vital part of that. They are never a waste of time, and those very words were said to me as a child to shame my crying. Once I understood how harmfully limiting that shaming was, it took a lot of work to break through the hard shell of fear and doubt. I was afraid that once I started, I would never stop, that I would feel my depression, that it was toxic and negative, that it was shameful and a waste of time. Nothing could have been more wrong, and I would encourage anyone to seek out help to get at those tears.
You just said to me 2 days ago that you were like, I need a good cry.
Right?
Yeah.
I love crying.
And then I asked you, my first, I was like, everything okay? And you're like, no, I just want to feel that surge of feeling.
Yeah. I just want to let it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that this story really, really touches on all the things that we've ever talked about before.
Yeah.
Which is, holy crap, what a vulnerable experience it is to like show someone how I'm really feeling. Especially when it's like one of those deep, deep emotions like sadness that lead us to cry.
Yeah. Like the degrees of crying, like you can be inconsolable.
Right. Yeah. You could be like banshee squealing crying.
Which has happened.
Yeah. Which is my preferred method of communication.
It's just banshee squealing. I prefer a good squawk.
Yeah. Just a good, like, a whale cry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you cry?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will give you a specific example recently when I cried.
Okay.
Which didn't make sense to me.
Okay.
But then if we dig deep into it, it probably does make sense. But this is not about me. I mean,
but you're going to make it.
But I'm going to make it about
in
me.
Just a second.
Yeah. Stand by.
Yeah.
Sometimes when things feel too big, I just get overwhelmed and I just start crying. I feel very much like Kristen Bell with like the sloth. Like when she talked about like how I just get I just cry.
Yeah.
I was like, there is nothing more true.
Yeah.
Than what makes me cry. I don't cry usually at like the things that are like movies that are meant to be sad. I'll cry at like the end of Incredibles when like Violet, spoiler alert, like redeems herself. And then I'm bawling because she finds her sense of like the C character in the movie finds her sense of self and I'm crying.
Yeah.
Like that's me. Right?
Oh my gosh. Hashtag relatable.
But this is not about me.
I mean, I think it's important that we get to like to share parts of our stories too. And I think also too, the reason why we got on this tangent is because the way that this person wrote this story, it's so easy to see yourself in it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's so easy to see yourself in just the ways that feelings naturally come up and can be seen as like rather inconvenient.
Yeah.
And so this person, their final suggestion is to encourage people to seek out help. And so I'm curious, like, what do you think that help has to look like? Like, does it have to be like the help of like a trained professional?
I think as long as you can take the feeling outside of your, like the inside, and whatever you can do to help it come outward. And it's not necessarily meaning I need to, is that wrong?
No, I love it.
Oh, okay. I don't know. You did a,
I did are you sure?
But like whatever it takes to get it from inside to outside.
Yeah.
Because you have told me so many times that our feelings live, like these big emotions live in our body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so much of our feelings are physical reactions to these like big feelings. So like, you feel like you're crying, you get a tightness in your throat, like you have all of those things, like you have physical manifestations of this big feeling.
Yes.
And it sounds like in this certain case and crying in general, a lot of people like push it away and push it down because it's shameful, it's ugly.
Yeah.
So
it's uncomfy, right?
I think help is anything that helps you like break free from that.
Right. And like access it or like excavate it in kind of like a
like let it go.
Let it go.
And let it be.
Yeah. Let it be.
So many copyright infringements. We own the rights to none of these songs.
Yeah, I mean part of like the interesting I'm seeing some connections between this story and our first story. It's so much safer and so much more comfortable sometimes for us to shove it away. And for us to not have to kind of like face it and unearth it and like, you know, like pick at it. And the way that I kind of like explain that even in some of the work that I do is this idea of like you can have like a wound. So like if you have like a physical like gash like on your arm, it's gonna like heal itself. Like if you create the conditions for it to heal. Like ointment on it, you can like protect it with a bandage. You can like let it open to air during certain parts of the healing process. But when we start to pick at it, and when we start to interrupt that like very natural process by shoving it away and not feeling or like not confronting it or like over like picking at it and like overanalyzing it and like thinking about it too much, kind of like really disrupting that very natural healing process, it doesn't allow us to like actually embrace like how the body naturally just heals itself, like if you let it, right? And if you kind of like surrender to it. And so when I hear a lot of people who are kind of like, oh, I just want to be able to cry. Like, I just want to be able to like let loose. And my first question often is like, how come?
Oh.
Yeah. And it's not to say that, you know, people shouldn't want those things. It's more a question around why is that what you need? And why is that your unmet need, maybe?
And what are some of the answers that people say to that?
So when you sort of like dig a little bit deeper and sort of say, what is it about crying that would be a release for you? Yeah. And actually, what are the things that are preventing you from crying? That's sort of what I'm getting at when I ask, like, how come? Like, why do you think that you want to cry more? Or like, why do you think that you need more crying?
Because it's like the symptom.
Yeah.
Like that's not the thing.
Right.
Oh.
We are not as consciously in control of crying as we would like to believe, right? So when people say I want to cry more, I'm like, okay, well, what kind of work are we willing to sort of do in order to make that a byproduct of?
Oh my God.
I mean, like, I don't mean to go down the territory of like...
Please do. I think we're all there. I think we all feel like we're in the middle of like some sort of like
this is
deep
like
cave lantern tour.
Yes.
And then you're like, actually, never mind. And you snuff out your light and we're like, no, Jake, no, turn your lantern back on. Tell us where to go. Be our guide.
And really, it's like a goblin who's like, no, follow me. I promise it'll be worth it.
Yeah.
And then you get to the end, you're like, oh,
this was all a dream.
You mean I just have to feel my feelings? You mean I just have to... All I'm saying is that like, there's a lot of depth like to this work that goes beyond just like needing a good cry. Which is very complex, and maybe that's like another episode on crying.
It just seems like we keep coming up with new episode ideas throughout the process of this.
Yeah,
but to bring it back to this person's story, what they do end up with, which also connects to the question that you initially asked me, which is like, what does help look like?
Yeah.
So it sounds like in order to do this complicated work of figuring out, okay, you want to cry, but it's not really about that. It's about this. You seek help.
Yeah.
And what does that look, Lancer? But it sounds like step one is like getting it out of your body.
I think it's like a combination of getting into your body.
Getting into your body. So step zero.
So that you can like kind of excavate it, right?
Okay.
So that you can get it out of it.
This was supposed to be an episode about crying and vulnerability, and now we've gone down. But I love this. This makes me really excited.
Okay.
I genuinely do mean this. Not only am I like very curious about all of this stuff, and I think a lot of people are, but it seems like everything is connected all the time.
Yeah.
And so we can't help but start off by being like, hey, this is a vulnerability tour.
Right.
Turns into crying, which then turns into like there is so much work to be done because there is so many things about understanding the language of emotion and feelings and all of that stuff. But that's hopefully what this podcast will help provide, which is a conversation about this stuff, because by no means are we saying that we have the answers.
Yeah.
This isn't a Dear Abby where it's like we're giving advice. This isn't therapy. You may find these conversations therapeutic, but it all sounds like we're having like the conversations about these things that would be inside of the therapy room, where we're taking it out right now, and we're kind of airing it, and we're saying, hey, we can have just like a normal conversation about these things without it having to be therapy.
Exactly. Like, this is like a conversation starter too. Like, and I like to keep things real. I like to keep things honest, but like, I also like to keep things like necessarily complex, right? Because I don't like to oversimplify things, and I don't like to like kind of give people like the list, because I feel like that is incomplete. And so there's going to be lots of nuance, and there's going to be lots of like messiness in these conversations, which I like, and I'm glad that like you're kind of here on the ride with me.
Oh, I love it. So that was good and fun. Episode 2. Here we go. We've arrived at the end. Time to get off at this station and maybe wait for the another train.
Yeah.
Which is episode 3. But before we get to the end, we like to end the episodes with just like a fun little victory, or like a thing about positivity.
Little victories. I love that.
Little victories.
That's fun.
Is that it? Because this podcast isn't therapy, and I'll keep saying that. We kind of want to advocate for therapy.
Yeah.
And we're gonna share some of these aha moments that Jake put on his Instagram, and put a call out for. Did you ever have these moments in therapy where you were like, aha? And here are some of the submissions that we received.
This person says, it's important to start small, take one step at a time, and listen to the snow melt one drop at a time. Like, whoa, hello, profound.
Is that like because we get so caught up in like seeing the big picture that we need to slow down and see the small little things that make up that big picture?
If there was any advertisement for therapy, and for the reasons why and how it works, it's because it's slow. It's because it's like so slow and like controlled and like safe and like well like constructed. To revisit that like analogy of like the wound earlier, right? Like, in order for healing to take place, it has to be slow. It's inherently slow. And it's unfortunate though, because a lot of us want the answers. We want it like wrapped up. We want it like to happen right now.
I want to Google it.
Yes.
I want to have it on, and like,
I want the discomfort gone. I want it over with.
Yeah.
And I love that this one reminds us to take it slow.
So this one says, you can't outthink your feelings. How great. Sometimes they just like match perfectly with what we're talking about.
That's the one.
The episode, but I think this is the one. I don't know if there's anything more to talk about that, because we talked so much about that in this episode. Yeah. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in a future episode. But that idea that your emotions don't live in your brain. Is that wrong?
I mean, like, you know, like for the neuroscience folks out there, I'm sure it's up for debate. But really the idea is that thinking and feeling are two different things. And oftentimes we kind of conflate them. And I'll give you an example. So we live in this like really interesting and like weird feelings culture where I think it's more like acceptable for us to say, haha, that's funny, or to type LOL than to actually like laugh at a joke. And that like is such a distinct example of ways that like we often try to intellectualize or think about our feelings rather than actually just like experience them and feel them.
Just just laugh instead of.
Yeah, feelings are meant to be felt, not thought about. Like, feelings are meant to be like experienced, right?
Namaste.
Snaps
Namaste.
For Jesus. Yeah. And so this person says, it's okay to change your mind.
This is freaky because look at the one I'm looking at too.
What does it say?
You're allowed to change your mind.
No way.
I'm not joking.
Lying to me.
No, it's this one, right?
No, it's a different one.
But that's funny.
Wow.
We both picked two different people's submission, but they had the same submission.
Is it a full moon tonight? Like, what's gonna happen?
Is it like Scorpio rising or whatever that is? Is it? Scorpios out there, if you're listening, are you rising right now?
Yeah. Are you on the rise?
Are you on the rise?
Are you the dough in the oven that is rising?
Are you? You're allowed to change your mind.
You are allowed to change your mind.
We forget that.
Nothing is fixed, right? Yeah. You're allowed to change your mind, and you're allowed to like recorrect yourself, right? You're allowed to like go back on a decision you made.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's that like quote? I think we liked it. This idea about like you can have like strong opinions loosely held.
Yes.
That to me is just kind of like worth its weight in gold.
Yeah. So that's it. We officially reached the end of episode 2. We want to thank you again, not only for listening to episode 2, but also for all the people who have continued to engage with us. Not only about, all the comments and everything that we are receiving, which we're very grateful for, but also for people engaging with our prompts and actually submitting, because there's always that fear of like, I'm going to invite people to my party and no one's going to show up.
No one's going to care.
No one's going to care about me. But you all care about me.
Yeah. If you like what you heard,
yes,
please go and give us like a nice little rating on whatever platform you're listening on. That would mean the world to us.
Yeah.
That's super helpful for getting the word out there. So I'm wondering, Simon, do you have any final thoughts?
I want to know where people can reach you.
Yeah, people can reach me by dialing 666-23
and that's it.
4. People can find me at MSWJake on all social media platforms. Where can people find you?
They can't.
No,
I don't exist. This is all a dream, Jake, for you. It's a dream, Dorothy. You can find me on Instagram and only Instagram at directed by Simon. And that's where you can see it. So thank you so much for listening. This isn't therapy, but I hope you found it insightful, wonderful. Yeah. You enjoyed it? You had fun?
And perhaps even therapeutic. Oh my gosh.
Ooh.
Yeah. The next episode is going to be great. We're going to talk about something really, really special, which is finding a therapist.
We've been inside the room a lot. We're going to go outside.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy. Okay.
Peace.
Bye.
Bye.
Love, live, laugh.
Like, bye.
Fade to black. And scene.
And...
Duh.
Wow.
These old bones.
It's 6 o'clock.